I never thought a single sentence could erase 32 years of marriage. But that morning, standing barefoot in our quiet kitchen in Rhode Island, watching winter light spill across the floor I had scrubbed 1,000 times, my husband looked at me and said, "You're too old for me now." He didn't shout. He didn't even sound angry. That was the cruelest part. His voice was calm, almost polite, as if he were returning a sweater that no longer fit. I remember the clock on the wall ticking loudly, every second echoing in my chest. I remember the smell of burnt toast. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world didn't stop, even though mine had just collapsed. I am Margaret Hale. I was 62 years old when my husband decided I had expired. I met Richard Hale when I was 29. He was charming then, tall, ambitious, with a smile that made you believe in futures. We built our life brick by brick. Not glamorous, but solid. I worked nights as a cleaner at the courthouse downtown while raising our 2 children during the day. Richard climbed corporate ladders. I climbed exhaustion. I never complained. I believed in sacrifice. I believed in us. But time does something to men like Richard. Success makes them forget who held the ladder steady while they climbed. Wrinkles on a woman become flaws, not evidence of survival. 4 months before that morning, he had grown distant. New suits. Late meetings. A phone always turned face down. He joined a gym, suddenly obsessed with mirrors. And me. I became furniture. Still useful. Still there. But unseen. That morning, he didn't sit down. He didn't look me in the eye. "I've been thinking," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I deserve more. I still have a life to live." I waited. Women like me learn how to wait for the knife. Then he said it. "You're too old for me now." He added almost kindly, "You've changed." I wanted to scream that he had changed. That my body bore the proof of children, grief, loyalty. That age comes for everyone. Instead I whispered, "After everything?" He sighed, like I was exhausting him. "I don't want to fight. I've already spoken to a lawyer." That's when I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. He moved out 2 weeks later. Not to an apartment. To her. I found out through our daughter Emma, who tried to soften the truth like a child breaking bad news. "She's younger," Emma said carefully. "He says she makes him feel alive." Alive. As if I had been killing him slowly with loyalty. The silence after Richard left was deafening. I slept on one side of the bed, the other still perfectly made. Muscle memory is cruel. I cooked for 2. I reached for my phone to tell him small things. Milk was on sale, the neighbor's dog had puppies, and then remembered I no longer had a husband. I had become a phase he outgrew. But pain has a strange way of sharpening your senses. And that's when I started noticing things. The mail. Bank statements. Documents Richard never thought I would read. I noticed how quickly he tried to rush the divorce. How eager he was for me to sign and move on. How often he reminded me that he had been the provider. I noticed something else too. The accounts didn't add up. Years ago, decades ago, when our children were small and money was tight, I took a job no one in my family ever talked about. I cleaned the Rhode Island Superior Court. Night shifts. Empty hallways. Marble floors. Judges' chambers. It wasn't glamorous. But it paid steadily. And I was careful. Painfully careful. Over time, I learned how systems worked. I learned how money moved. I learned who really funded what. And quietly, invisibly, I invested. Not in stocks. In people. In funds that backed legal infrastructure. Technology upgrades. Renovations. Small amounts at first. Then more. All under my name. Richard never knew. Why would he? To him, I was just the help. The woman who folded his laundry. Packed his lunches. Smiled politely at corporate dinners. He never asked where the extra money came from when our mortgage disappeared faster than expected. He never wondered how we could afford private schools. He assumed. Men like Richard always assume. The day he came to pick up the last of his things, he barely looked at me. "You'll be fine," he said, grabbing a box. "I'll make sure you're taken care of." I smiled. Not because I believed him, but because I finally understood something important. I had survived far worse than abandonment. And I had done it quietly. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and opened a folder I had kept hidden for years. Inside were documents Richard had never seen. Accounts, shares, deeds, proof. Not of revenge, of truth. And as the winter wind rattled the windows, I made myself a promise. I would not beg. I would not scream. I would not destroy him. I would let him destroy himself by underestimating me. Because the most dangerous woman in the room is the one everyone believes is already finished. And Richard. He thought my story ended the day he walked out. He had no idea. It was just beginning. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Thick. Cream-colored. Heavy with confidence. Richard's confidence. I recognized the law firm's name immediately. One of the most aggressive divorce firms in Providence. The kind that prided itself on clean breaks and efficient outcomes. Words that sounded tidy, but usually meant someone bled quietly. I made tea before opening it. That's how women like me handle earthquakes. We perform normal rituals to keep from shattering. Inside were divorce papers already filled out. Assets listed. Timelines proposed. My signature line waiting patiently at the bottom, like a trap disguised as courtesy. A yellow sticky note clung to the first page. "Maggie, this will make things easier for both of us. Please sign and return by Friday." Richard. He had always called me Maggie when he wanted something. I read the papers slowly. Once. Then again. At first glance, it was generous. He would keep the house. I would receive a modest settlement and monthly support, until remarriage or death. He would retain all business interests. Retirement accounts would be equitably divided. Equitably. Such a flexible word. I could hear his voice already. This is more than fair. But I didn't stop at the summaries. I read the fine print. The footnotes. The clauses most people skim past because they assume the world is kinder than it is. That's when I found it. Clause 17b. Buried deep. Written in language so dry it could lull you into trust. It stated that any assets not disclosed by either party at the time of signing would remain the sole property of the original holder, immune from future claims. Richard thought this clause protected him. He assumed I had nothing to hide. He assumed wrong. I leaned back in my chair and laughed, a soft, startled sound that surprised even me. 4 years, Richard had controlled the narrative of our marriage. He was the earner, the decision-maker, the man who handled finances. I was the background, the silence, the help. And now, that silence was about to speak. I didn't sign right away. I waited. I let him think I was overwhelmed, confused, hurt. When he called, I let my voice tremble just enough. "I don't understand all of this," I said quietly. "I might need time." He exhaled, annoyed but careful. "Maggie," the lawyer explained everything. "This is standard." "I know," I whispered. I trusted you with money for so long." There was a pause. Then the reassurance, the tone men use when they believe they're winning. "You don't need to worry anymore," he said. "I'll take care of it." That was the moment I knew. He still believed I was small. While Richard played house with his new life, I began preparing mine. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Methodically. I contacted my own attorney, a woman named Janice Bell, sharp-eyed and quietly lethal. She didn't interrupt when I explained my work history, my investments, My long absence from Richard's financial world. When I finished, she smiled. "Oh," she said. "He has no idea." "No," I replied. "He really doesn't." Janice helped me restructure things. Not to hide, everything I owned was legal, clean, documented, but to clarify. Ownership. Control. Timing. I signed the divorce papers exactly as Richard requested. By Friday. No changes. No objections. No drama. When he received them, he sent a single text. "Thank you for being reasonable." I stared at the word reasonable for a long time. The divorce finalized quickly. Richard celebrated by posting photos online. Champagne glasses, candlelit dinners, vacations with someone whose youth he mistook for meaning. I watched quietly. And then, just when he thought the chapter was closed, something interesting happened. 3 months after the divorce, Richard called me. Not to apologize. Not to check on me. But to complain. "I don't understand it," he said, frustration sharp in his voice. "There's an audit at work. Things are complicated." I said nothing. "I might need a temporary loan," he added. "Just until this blows over." I nearly smiled. "From me?" I asked softly. "Well," he said, defensive now, "we were married for 30 years. Yes, I thought. And you learned nothing about me." I declined politely. I told him I was living on a fixed income now. He believed me. Of course he did. Men like Richard never imagined that the woman they dismissed could be the one holding the lever. What Richard didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that several of the systems his company depended on were funded by a private investment group. A quiet one. An investment group whose founding partner had once cleaned courtrooms at night. An investment group whose controlling interest belonged to Margaret Hale. I didn't plan revenge. I planned inevitability. I didn't need to attack. I only needed to step aside and let the truth arrive on time. The first official letter reached Richard's office 2 weeks later. Not from me. From a board. A board he didn't realize I sat on. The call came on a Thursday morning. Not to me, to Richard. But I heard about it anyway. Because when a man like Richard begins to fall, he doesn't fall quietly. He pulls the air down with him. I was standing at my kitchen window, watching early spring light stretch across the yard, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered calmly. Margaret Hale speaking. There was a pause on the other end, not confusion, but recalculation. "Mrs. Hale," a man finally said, formal and measured. "This is Thomas Granger from Granger and Wolfe. We represent the Hawthorne Investment Consortium." I closed my eyes briefly. Yes. That was the one. "I believe you're attempting to reach my ex-husband," he continued. "However, your name appears prominently in our records." "Does it?" I asked gently. "Yes. You're listed as a majority stakeholder." I smiled. "I am." What happened next unfolded like dominoes, slow enough to savor, fast enough to devastate. Richard had been summoned to an emergency meeting. He thought it was routine. He'd worn his best suit. The one he used to say made him look authoritative. He walked into a room where the smiles were thin and the folders were thick. The audit wasn't about numbers. It was about control. Contracts were being reevaluated. Funding streams reconsidered. Partnerships paused. Words that sound harmless. Until you realize they mean you are no longer needed. Richard tried charm first. Then indignation. Then threats. None of it worked. Because power doesn't argue. It waits. And then it decides. I learned all of this later from Janice, who called me that afternoon. "It's happening," she said. "They're unraveling his position." I set my tea down carefully. "And him?" "He's confused," she replied. "Angry. He thinks someone betrayed him." I almost laughed. Someone had. But not who he thought. That evening, my doorbell rang. I hadn't expected him so soon. Richard stood on my porch, thinner somehow. His confidence was still there, but cracked, like glass under pressure. "Maggie," he said, using the old name again. I didn't invite him in. "What do you want, Richard?" He swallowed. "I need to talk." I crossed my arms, calm and still. "Then talk." "They're cutting me out," he said. "The board. The investors. I don't understand it." I said nothing. "I built that company," he insisted. "I gave it everything." "Yes," I replied softly. "You did." There it was, the first flicker of doubt. He leaned closer. "You wouldn't know anything about this, would you?" I met his eyes. "I know exactly what's happening." Silence. Thick. Heavy. Unavoidable. "What do you mean?" he asked. I stepped aside then, finally allowing him in. Not out of kindness, out of timing. He sat at the table where we once planned vacations, futures, grandchildren we never had. I took my seat across from him. "Richard," I said, "do you remember when I worked nights at the courthouse?" He frowned. "You cleaned floors." "Yes," I nodded. "And listened. Learned. Saved." He shifted uncomfortably. "I invested quietly," I continued. "In systems you never noticed. In people you overlooked." His face drained of color. "You're bluffing." I reached into the drawer beside me and placed a single folder on the table. He opened it. Slowly. Each page drained something from him. Certainty, arrogance, entitlement. By the end, his hands were shaking. "You," he whispered. "You own." "Enough," I said. "More than enough." He stood abruptly, pacing now. "All those years," he said, voice rising. "You let me think." "I let you assume," I corrected. He stopped. Turned to me. "You planned this." "No," I replied calmly. "I prepared for it." His voice cracked then, not with remorse but fear. "They'll destroy me," he said. "I'll lose everything." I looked at the man who once told me I was too old to matter. "You already did," I said. He sank back into the chair. "I need your help." There it was. The begging hadn't begun yet, but it was close. I stood. "I won't interfere," I said. "I won't save you. And I won't destroy you." He looked up, confused. "I'll simply stop protecting you." When he left, his shoulders were hunched. Not defeated, but exposed. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to hide who I was. Richard's downfall didn't come with a scream. It came with silence. The kind of silence that spreads when boardroom doors close without you, when calls stop being returned, when your name, once spoken with respect, becomes something people avoid. And this time, everyone was watching. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. I hadn't planned to attend. But something in me, not revenge, not anger, but closure told me I should be there. So I went. Not as Richard's wife. Not as his savior. But as myself. The room was polished steel and glass, full of men and women who wore power like perfume. Richard sat near the front, stiff-backed, jaw clenched. When he saw me enter, his head snapped up. Hope. That was the look. I ignored it and took my seat. The meeting began. Numbers were presented. Forecasts revised. Projections adjusted downward. Then came the votes. One by one. Cold. Efficient. Final. By majority decision, the chair announced, "Richard Hale is removed from his executive role, effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the room. Richard stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You can't." The chair raised a hand. "You no longer have standing here, Mr. Hale." That was it. No applause. No argument. Just removal. Richard turned then. Looked straight at me. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Not pride. Illusion. He finally understood. After the meeting, people clustered in tight groups, whispering. Richard tried to speak to them. Former allies, old friends. They avoided his eyes. He walked toward me slowly, like a man crossing ice he knows will crack. "You did this," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "No," I replied. I stopped pretending. He laughed then, a brittle sound. "All those years," he said, shaking his head. "I thought you were weak." "I was patient," I corrected. He stared at me, searching for cruelty. He didn't find it. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. By evening, the news had spread. Online articles. Speculation. Rumors. Richard's name was everywhere, stripped of context, authority, protection. And then came the calls. From creditors. From lawyers. From people demanding answers he didn't have. He showed up at my door again that night. This time, he didn't knock. He rang the bell. Twice. Then knocked anyway. I opened the door slowly. He looked smaller. Not just defeated, unmoored. "I have nothing left," he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. Not out of sympathy. Out of finality. He paced my living room like a caged animal. "They're freezing accounts," he said. "Selling assets." "The house. Our house?" I asked softly. He flinched. "Yes." I nodded. "That's already settled." He stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" I handed him an envelope. Inside was the transfer notice. My name. Only mine. The house was no longer his concern. He dropped into the chair, face in his hands. "I made a mistake," he whispered. I sat across from him. "No," I said. "You made a choice." He looked up, eyes wet now. "Please," he said. "I'll do anything." I waited. Not because I wanted to hear it, but because he needed to say it. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About everything." I nodded once. "I know." Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Necessary. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I won't rescue you." He nodded weakly. "I understand." I wasn't sure he truly did. But it didn't matter. Understanding wasn't required anymore. When he left that night, he didn't look back. For the first time in decades, neither did I. I stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the quiet life I had rebuilt piece by piece. Not flashy. Not loud. But mine. Richard came back one last time. Not to plead. Not to bargain. But because some endings demand to be witnessed. It was a quiet afternoon when I saw his name on my phone again. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But then I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. So I answered. "Can we meet?" he asked. His voice wasn't broken now. It was hollow. I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because I owed myself peace. We met at a small cafe across town. The kind of place no one notices. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived. No suit. No watch. Just a man and the weight of his past. "I'm leaving," he said after a moment. I stirred my coffee slowly. "Where?" "Does it matter?" he replied with a sad smile. I shook my head. "No." He nodded, accepting that. He looked at me carefully. "You're different," he said. "Stronger than I ever imagined." I met his gaze. "I didn't become strong to defeat you," I said. "I became strong to survive you." That truth settled between us. "I said you were too old," he whispered. "I wanted you to disappear quietly." I didn't flinch. "I heard you," I said. "And I chose not to." He swallowed hard. "I lost everything." I leaned forward slightly. "No," I corrected gently. "You lost what you took for granted." Silence followed. But this time, it wasn't painful. It was complete. "I won't ask for forgiveness," he said finally. "I don't deserve it." I studied him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. "You're right," I said. "You don't." His shoulders relaxed, strangely relieved. "I forgive myself," I continued, "for staying too long, for shrinking myself, for believing your voice over my own." Tears filled his eyes. "But they weren't my responsibility." When we stood to leave, he paused. "You won," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I lived." That night, I sat alone on my porch. The air was cool. The stars steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying the past. I was imagining the future. I began volunteering, mentoring women who had been told they were invisible, too old, too quiet, too late. I told them the truth. That strength doesn't arrive with noise. That revenge isn't about destruction. That the most powerful answer is becoming someone who no longer needs permission. I kept my life simple, peaceful, full. Not because I was afraid of loss, but because I finally understood my worth. If you're listening to this, if someone once told you that you were finished, that your time had passed, that you should step aside quietly, hear me now. You are not expired. You are not replaceable. You are not invisible. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making them beg. It's making sure they never have power over you again. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe it's never too late to reclaim your life, like, subscribe, and stay with me, because there are more stories still waiting to be told. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning.